I'm talking to Brendan McMahon, who has an extraordinary 6 albums out. I think getting 1 album out is amazing, let alone 6. And that 6th album recently released is called As the Road Unfolds. Hello, Brendan.
Hello, how are you, Sophie?
I'm very well, thank you. Pleased to be speaking to you. But I thought I'd go way back into the past, your musical past. And I was reading that your musical awakening was actually Jimi Hendrix. Was it his guitar playing or was it the whole package?
Oh, the whole package. I mean, he was the coolest guy ever. You know, to see Jimi Hendrix play on stage and play so effortlessly and set his guitar alight and just the sounds he made, it was just so cool. I was going to be as cool as Jimi Hendrix. Never got there. That was my intention.
And what age were you when you had that musical awakening?
I don't even remember. I would have been in my teens, maybe 13 or 14.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So after that, did you rush out and buy a guitar or did you think about it for a while?
I pestered my mother to lend me money to buy a guitar. And we had 4 kids. Dad was working, mum was at home with the kids. So we didn't have a lot of spare cash. So it took me till I was about nearly 16 to convince mum to lend me $60.
Right.
And I started work soon after that, and I think I paid her back for most of it.
Yeah. I'm sure she could grant you a little bit of leeway there.
Yeah,
so what job did you have to pay back that guitar?
I started out as a Boilermaker welder.
Okay.
And then hated that and swapped to an electrical apprenticeship.
Well, both very useful things to have. And I imagine, being an electrician, even more useful perhaps because you can do various things. So did you teach yourself to play that guitar or did you have some lessons?
Predominantly I taught myself, but look, I've had spasmodic lessons over the years. And I remember I had a guitar teacher I found in a place called Nuriukpa, which is in the Barossa Valley. And that was about 20 minutes from home. And it was a guy called Tom Harding. And he would have been, I reckon, in his 70s, maybe even in his 80s then when I started. And he loved the Shadows. So he taught me a whole pile of songs by the Shadows. And he used to get cranky at me because I always have played by ear rather than by music. And he'd give me the music, go home, learn this, come back next week and play me the song. So I'd come back and I'd play the song and he'd say to me, "You're not reading the music, are you?" And I said, "No, I'm not really into reading music. Once I pick the tune up, I'm okay with it." So, but he was a lovely bloke. I started out playing the Shadows.
Well, I have a theory about reading music and playing by ear because I learned to read music at a very young age and I cannot play by ear. And the people I know who can play really well by ear can't read music. So I'm wondering if the two things actually don't go together that well.
Well, I think the people who have learned from a young age to read music did it quite easily. But when you get, even though I was 16 when I sort of started playing guitar, I think I'd missed that early learning period where you adopt things a lot easier. So I went for it. I went by ear, and that's just worked for me. So I just kept doing it.
So I guess what that means is you have to sit down with the recording and just replay it, or are you quite quick to pick up things when you play by ear?
Well, these days I play my own stuff, so it doesn't matter. But I do remember there was this wonderful thing that a company called Ibanez, who are a guitar manufacturer, brought out. And it was a little cassette deck back when there were cassettes. You could put your cassette in there and you could push half speed, and then you could try and learn to play guitar solos at half speed. Because trying to learn to play a Van Halen guitar solo at full speed is ridiculous. Half speed is bad enough. So,
well, these days, because there's an app called Chordify that I use when I'm playing guitar, and you can play it at various speeds there. So it's just gone online, all of that technology. So around the time you were starting to play guitar, and you had some lessons, but what music were you listening to that you loved?
I think the first album I ever bought, I don't think we got a record player till about that time, 13 or 14 years old. And I think the first album I bought was Daddy Cool's Greatest Hits. And that was really cool. And after that, I did get into guitar rock. So I got into Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and Jimi Hendrix and Jethro Tull, not that they're guitar rock, but those sorts of bands, you know, those Plasters, heavy metal back then, but really just rock and roll bands.
Yeah. And given that you had 3 siblings, did they tell you to shut up when you were practicing guitar?
Well, no, I had an electric guitar. I didn't have an acoustic guitar. So I started on electric. And we had a fairly sizable house, and my room was downstairs. It was like a dungeon. Yeah, so, right. But I only had a 5-watt Coronet amp. So it wasn't like I was going to blast the house down. I didn't start off with a 100-watt Marshall quad box. It was just, you could hardly hear it at full volume.
Yeah. Well, then it was the perfect thing to have in the house.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you joined some bands, and I was reading you played some cover bands as well. What was the very first band you were in?
The first band I was in, and there's a bit of a story to it. It was my brother-in-law back then, and he's still my brother-in-law because the way things turned out, he married my sister, I married his, and he's still with my sister. So him and another mate of mine, a guitarist mate, we went out and we decided we're going to form a band. So we lived in a small country town called Kapunda. Mm-hmm. And we decided it was a nice Saturday night. So we'd take our gear out, and I just bought a big amplifier. We take our gear out on the front porch of our home, which was on a hill, and it sort of overlooked the whole town. And within about a half an hour, the police were there booking us for noise pollution. So I don't think we could have sounded too good.
And so from the start, like those early live experiences, did you love it, or did you have a few nerves about it, or both?
Oh, no, loved it. The first proper gig we did, I think, was at my sister's 21st birthday, and we knew 7 songs. And I think there might have been a couple of Beatles songs, a Stone song, you know, the easier stuff to play in a 3-piece band. And we played in a small town hall just outside of Kapunda, a place called Allendale, and the whole heap of people there for her birthday. And we had our 7 songs. We went on stage. We had really crusty gear. There was nothing good about it. And the crowd just went off. So we played those 7 songs 3 times over because that's all we knew. That was our first gig, but loved it from that point.
Well, if no one complained that you were playing it 3 times over, then what does it matter?
No, that's it. Exactly.
So it sounds like you had a progression of bands. So after that 3-piece, do you remember what you went on to after that?
Yeah, I joined a band with another drummer and his brother is a bass player. Band called Sunset Boulevard. Then I joined a band called No Exit. Then I joined a band called Mainstream. Then formed a band called Undercover, and on and on and on. Just cover rock bands basically, and progressed that way for probably 15 or 17 years. Mm-hmm. Ended up in a band called the Cunning Stunts, mm-hmm. Which you've got to be really careful saying.
Yes.
And that was probably the end of my my rock period at the end of the Cunning Stunts. But we did release a 7-track EP of a few songs that I'd written back then.
So when you say the end of your rock period, were you naturally inclining towards doing different sorts of music, or you just sort of thought, I've had enough of rock, I'm going to look for something else? No,
I had a bit of a break from music, probably a 10-year break from music, and I did a day job because that pays the bills. Mm-hmm. And in 2013, I was sitting down, and I hardly played for many years. And I was sitting down, I had my acoustic guitar at the dining table, strumming away, come up with a little guitar riff. And within a half an hour, I'd written a song. And it's the first song I'd written for as long as I can remember. It was a song called Morris. And I thought, I'll go out and buy a little recording package and try and record it. Mm-hmm. So I went up to one of the music stores. I think it was about $200 to buy some software and a condenser mic. Came back, recorded, learned how to use the stuff, recorded it, put it up on SoundCloud, I think it was back then. And I got a few positive responses. So I thought, well, that's interesting. So I thought I might write another song. So I ended up writing about a half a dozen songs, and then I thought, well, I want to get a nice recording because I knew I wasn't a professional recording engineer at this point.
Yeah.
So I found a studio which was only about 20 minutes away from home, and my whole intention was to go in and record 6 songs that I'd written with acoustic guitar and vocal, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't think about any more. And when I was in the studio was called Soggy Dog Recording. I still record there. Steve Vertigan, the engineer, he said, well, you know, if you want to do anything more with these songs, you know, I have a lot of session musicians that come in and play in the studio, and, you pay them to play, and they enhance what you've done. So I said, being a bit naive and never working with session guys before, I said, well, tell me more about that. And he went through and he said, oh, I've got a guy called Peter Maslin, a guy called Jason Voorher, a guy called Steve Wade, and a guy called Bob Spencer. And I said, Bob Spencer? I know of a guy called Bob Spencer. He played in the Angels. He said, yeah, that's Bob. And I said, are you serious? Bob Spencer's going to come in and play on my daggy songs? Really? He said, yeah, absolutely. And from that point I was all in. Right. Because, I'd loved going to see the Angels and watching Bob Spencer play. So as soon as I knew that Bob Spencer could play on one of my songs, all in, that's it. Tell me when, I'm here. So that's how it all came about.
Given that you'd spent so many years in bands, to then have quite a different structure to recording your music where it's not a band you're used to playing with, was there any kind of adjustment for you and thinking, all right, this is a different process and I'm now the creator and the singer more than I'm the performer, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. And to say I was overwhelmed when they asked me to play the first song to them, when I had Peter Maslin, Jason Voorher, and Bob Spencer sitting in the studio ready to hear my song, say I was overwhelmed is probably an understatement, because I was just as nervous as I ever have been, thinking, these guys are really cool, really great musos, and here I am, playing one of my songs to them. But that went really quickly, because as soon as I played the song, played the song, I could see them really focused on listening to the song, absorbing the song, and starting to think about how to workshop the song to get the best out of the song. Mm-hmm. So, that initial nervous period didn't last very long. And it was very quick for me to realize that these guys just love creating and love being in a creative environment. And, I present my songs, and all they want to do is make the best they possibly can out of my songs. So, we're mates now, obviously we've been working together for a long time, but back then it was just that teething period of trying to get over, not feeling adequate enough to be in the studio with those guys.
Mm. So it sounds like you continued to record that way, having those musicians come in for your later albums. Is that correct? They've been the same musicians pretty much?
Well, I've it's the same drummer and same bass player. Lots of different guitarists, different keyboard players. I think how many I counted up the other day that I've worked with about 8 guitar players now, and every one of them are just fantastic. From Bob Spencer, Steve Wade, who was in Little River Band, to Dave Leslie's and the Baby Animals, Brett Kingman, who plays with James Rain. So all fantastic guitarists, a number of different pianists, and a Hammond player, an amazing Hammond player called Kim Keller. Lots of different backing singers. I've recorded with members of the MSO, Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, which is a real hoot. So I've been fortunate to work with some just amazing musicians.
So I'm wondering, when you're writing songs, if you're partly thinking, I'm writing them for these people to play, so I want to have them a certain way or at a certain level of development before I go into the studio, or do you just write the songs you want to write and let the chips fall where they may in the studio?
It's exactly what I do. I write the songs how I write them, because that's how they fall out. Mm-hmm. And I don't try and coerce them into any different direction. But I'm very open in the studio. I learnt really early. It was one of the first songs we recorded that Peter Maslin, Maz, he heard the song differently and he wanted to double time the drums. And I pulled him up and said, no, that's not how the song goes. It goes like this. So we half-timed the drums. I got home that night and I thought, wonder what would have happened to the song if I didn't, ask him to hear it my way. So I made a promise to myself right then that, any time in that creative process when we're workshopping the songs, I would let them be as creative as they wanted to be, because we could always revert. If it didn't work, we could always revert and go back to what it was and how I heard the song. But I just didn't want to lose the opportunity to make a song better by having blinkers on and saying, no, that's not how the song goes. So I'm very open for them to be very creative and add to the song now.
But I suppose that's also a process as a songwriter of getting to the point where you feel you can let your song go and that you can trust these people to do the best by it. And I imagine it is difficult because this is something that you've created, you've held it close, and there's someone else saying, well, actually, I think it should be this when you think it's that.
Well, it doesn't happen very often. We've probably 2 or 3 times since I can remember that we've changed songs dramatically. But for the most part, the songs have held their own and been strong enough in their format for the guys just to work with and work in that template, if you like.
So on your albums, I've noticed that you do quite like to tell stories within songs. And I'm wondering whether you as a songwriter, you tend to start with a story idea, or if there are various things that spark your process, like it might be a feeling or just a scene in your head or something like that, or are you very story focused?
Yeah, I'm story focused, definitely. I like to try and write stories, and I like to try and write stories that people can build a visual picture of. Doesn't always happen that way, but a number of songs are about experiences from my life, from my early life, from my childhood, particularly through COVID. I found that I get a lot of inspiration from travel, and we've traveled a fair bit overseas. You see different cultures, different architecture, different environments, and I picked up a lot of ideas from there. But in this particular album, this 6th album, I found that there was a fair bit of stuff that was a bit reflective on, early childhood and experiences that I've had. But look, the songs come in all different ways. I dream songs, and I don't feel bad about saying that now, because I've spoken to so many songwriters who say the same thing. So I dream songs and I wake up with a song in my head and I'll go and record it, because I made an error earlier on that, I thought, I'll remember that in the morning. That's a really good song. It's in my head. I've dreamed it's really good. I'll remember that in the morning. Sing it through a couple of times in my head because it's cold and I don't want to get out of bed. And then next morning, no idea. So I made a pact to myself after I started writing my first songs in 2013. At any time I had a song idea, I would capture it wherever I was. So I've many times over the last 7 or 8 years, I've got out of bed in the middle of the night, sometimes 2 or 3 times, and gone and recorded songs into my phone. I've been standing in railway stations where I snuck off into a corner and sung a song into my phone, in shopping centres, anywhere. I want to capture all the songs. And I counted up one day of all the little snippets of bits and pieces that I've got recorded, and there's over 1,000 song ideas.
Right.
May never use them, but it's a process of flushing those out, maybe to get to the good stuff, or maybe to reflect on them and go back to them, and if I have a dry writing period, to use them as a source of inspiration to write other songs.
And you mentioned traveling, and I was reading that you've been to over 50 or so countries, and with that, as you said, different experiences, architecture, all sorts of things, that suggests that you're a curious person. You like finding out new things, you're interested in new things. I'm wondering if you've ever thought of songs, or each new song, as a country you haven't visited yet, with that same sort of curiosity for the song.
Well, I am a curious person, and I love the experience of, I've written songs. We were walking down a street in Havana, Cuba, and I saw a guy crushing sugarcane in a big old antique sugar, 2 big wheels, and he was spinning a handle. I thought, wow, there's a song in that. I just wish I'd have taken a camera and taken photos of it, because I went back to the hotel room, and then you go home, you reflect on your holiday, and all of a sudden I thought, wow, that guy was really cool. I'm going to write a song about him. Yeah. So that's kind of how it works.
So travel is also seems to have influenced the title of your new album, because it's called As the Road Unfolds. And I'm wondering if the musical road has ever led you somewhere that you really didn't expect.
Well, yeah, kind of. It led me to give up my full-time job to focus on music. So, and I did that. I'd been in a pretty senior position in a business for some time, many, many years. And being there for so long, I felt it right to give them 6 months notice, which I did. And my 6 months expired the week we went into our first lockdown in Victoria for COVID. So timing is everything. But that's okay. It wasn't an issue. I just, I thought, wow, I could have picked a better time, because I had, I'd built some relationships, and I'd had mini tours lined up with some really cool bands, and it all just came crashing down, and all the people that were in those positions booking all those gigs have moved on because of COVID and whatever. So it kind of smacked me in the face a little bit, because I expected to be doing a lot more live stuff, obviously, 2 years ago when I gave up full-time work. It gave me an opportunity to focus on this album and focus on writing, and I was still able to get out and about and record, in between our lockdowns. So, there were some positive things too.
Well, that is a very positive way to look at it, because some people might have been heartbroken by that particular chain of events. And I'm wondering with this album, because quite a few artists did hold on to albums to see how the pandemic played out. So you mentioned recording in between lockdowns. Was this an album that you had completed a while ago and you have held on to?
Yes, but not for that reason. The album was probably finished. Well, the pressing finished 2 weeks ago, so technically it hasn't been finished for long, but I'd finished musically on the album, mixing and mastering the album probably midway through last year.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit later, maybe July, August. So I started releasing singles. Anything I thought was single worthy, I started releasing songs off the album. And generally before, I've released the album, then the singles. This time I've released a number of singles and now the album. And from my experience, it's worked pretty well, because I've been able to put content out every couple of months for the last 8 months, and then finish it off with a single and an album. And that process has worked pretty well for me. And it's all about gaining awareness in the market and building audience and all those sorts of things. And it feels at this point like that's been a positive for me.
So do you think for your next album, and I presume there will be another one, that you'll repeat that process, singles, quite a few singles, and then an album?
If you could see this area here, you'd see 3 guitars and a banjo and my makeshift recording studio. I've already tracked 12 new songs for album number 7, and I've been recording guitar solos today for them. So yes, there'll be another album.
Right. Have you already decided on the singles, therefore?
Well, not really. We've tracked most of the songs. I haven't put backing vocals in yet. I've still got to do that. And I'm still working through the songs to see what additional instrumentation needs to go in them. And sometimes the songs come to life right near the end of the process. And a song you think is going to be an album song, let's say, if that's a thing anymore, turn out to be singles. And, but it's a last minute thing. I had a song a few years ago where we battled with the song. And I said to him, and I can't repeat what I said to the engineer, but I just said, let's call this next version a muck-up version. So you can probably get what I'm at. And we'll just completely pull the song apart and reconstruct it and see what happens. And it brought the song to life. And sometimes that happens right near the end of the process. So it's a bit hard. You've got your gut feel of what's going to be single worthy, and And I think there's a lot of songs on the next album 7, that will be single worthy, but that may change.
Mm-hmm. Now, given you have the title As the Road Unfolds, and you didn't get to play any shows for a couple of years because you live in Victoria, are you heading out on the road with this album?
Well, again, timing's everything. I've been playing a few small gigs at the moment, but I'm heading over to the US in a few weeks' time. Part vacation and part to suss out what I can through Austin and Phoenix and a few other places, and try and build some relationships over there. So that sort of puts me out till August. Then I'm heading up to Gympie. Right. Hope to be doing a bit in Gympie at the muster, and then booking gigs through the rest of the year, and then straight into Tamworth again, because Tamworth sort of falls on top of each other. With Tamworth being in April this year, it's not that long till Tamworth happens again. So it's going to be a busy period. So I'll be playing a lot.
Well, it sounds like you have many roads to travel with your new album. And Brendan, it was great to find out a bit more about it, and we'll look forward to album number 7.
Thank you very much. Don't forget album 6 though.
No, As the Road Unfolds is album 6. Thank you.
Thank you very much.